One of the biggest and most successful programs that we've seen in other states is parents as teachers, right? Parents receiving supports in order to be the best resource for their children at home, if they choose to be, and then also to support grandparents who may be that primary caregiver. So even in a family situation in a home, we want to make sure that we are providing resources to those families so that we can make sure that that child development is not only what the family wants to see, but is something they have the tools that they can kind of supplement what they're doing. And so the answer about, and so to talk a little bit about large business, I think it's always going to be a balance. And I think what Delaware has learned is that we have to have a unique pitch. We have to be a different type of bidder than, say, Fairfax, Virginia, or other places. And I think that is both the more we lean into being our unique economic selves, the better we're going to match with companies. I think there's been, some mismatches in the past. There's been some state resources that have been outlaid, and then companies have chosen to leave kind of when those expire. So I think from my perspective, I have two priorities. One is to build long-term sustainable relationships with the larger organizations. And I think that, that is easier said than done, but there needs to be an openness and an expectation if there are going to be, state partnerships in those ways. The other, though, is I think that we have a great capacity to build our small businesses here into medium-sized businesses, our medium-sized businesses into large businesses, and actually, very importantly, and something I've seen in my district, build our micro businesses into small businesses, helping entrepreneurs who are working out of their homes get their first employee or their first brick and mortar shop. And so I think that if we are looking at the full kind of range of economic opportunities for business owners and for employers, if we are looking at fostering people who have chosen Delaware already, and we want to help them recruit people for us, I think that is an amazing place to invest. And so obviously, I think you need to look at the full spectrum. But one of my priorities would definitely be to be working closely with those small and medium-sized businesses, particularly in Kent and Sussex County, where there's a tremendous opportunity for growth and for attracting workers to come to our state.
So that's great. Now, with when we come to healthcare and social services, healthcare is one of the biggest issues, not just from the social standpoint, but also from the budget standpoint. So 1/3 of the Delaware budget is for healthcare and social services. Now, from a healthcare provider standpoint, we have about 180 different providers, physicians and providers from different specialties. We do have a surgery center, American Surgery Center in North Wilmington. We are planning to have another one. And one of the challenges that we have is we are a nonprofit. We are not a nonprofit organization. We are a for-profit organization, and we compete with the nonprofit organizations. Now, earlier we spoke about the size of the states, whether or not this is an advantage and disadvantage. In some cases, especially in the healthcare world, we see Delaware as being dominated by one big hospital systems, and we lose a lot of private practices in time. And I'm firsthand, I'm a witness of this from different clients, different practices that I know. And I see that as a challenge for us. And in some cases, I don't believe that although what we provide and how we provide and who we provide is not different than the nonprofit, we don't have that same support. Like, for example, 1/3 of my patient population is Medicaid, and 20% is about Medicare. So that means half of our population that we provide services are between the federal and state level people. So Do you think we can at some point, because why this is important is because the cost of healthcare is increasing, and if you don't have alternatives, and if you don't have good, viable alternatives, and if you lose those alternatives, then this may become a big monopoly, and then we can lose the leverage on the cost and controlling the cost. Do you think, overall, what is your take on healthcare in Delaware?
So my overall take is that I think I have the frustrations that many consumers have when it comes to healthcare. I have, like I said, 2 young children. I've waited a long time to get new doctors, to get appointments. I've waited months for my own healthcare services. I've sought, OBGYN care, but the OBGYNs can barely keep up with having to serve women and people who are pregnant and birthing, right? So I think that I am probably experiencing what my constituents are experiencing. And what I have seen in my role as a senator is that coming up with kind of single, like I talked about earlier, kind of single bill solutions is an incredibly challenging way to try to address an incredibly challenging problem. And so I think when we talk about kind of changing our healthcare system, we are going to have to rely a lot on our federal delegation and President Biden to continue to drive the federal policy that will help us do better here in Delaware. But we are going to have to look at our governance and administration of our Department of Health and Social Services, as well as our partnerships throughout the state with healthcare facilities, in order to think, I would say, more broad-based about what we're trying to do. And I think the first thing is we have to agree on what we are solving for, right? There are a lot of constituencies within healthcare. And I think, though, that there are a lot of overlapping issues. So I think if we start maybe talking more about the, I would say, types of changes we'd like to see, and rather than talking about just the constituencies we want to serve better, I think that we could look at some more broad-based changes. We've done great work, I think, with the primary care bill. That too has run into challenges. Everything has to be an iterative process. We have to be willing to go back to the table. We have to be willing to talk about how we can do better the next time. And we have to see the continuation of in-depth policy talks. We can't just look at an issue and say we solved it. We've got to go and keep talking. So that might not be exactly that's a little bit more than just my take, but I think we have to be honest with ourselves that this is not something that we are going to solve with one bill or perhaps one administration. We are going to need sustained work in the area.
What can be done so that your office can actually see more than just the fully insured populations?
Well, what we have done is we're working with the General Assembly to, and this is something that seems kind of silly, but the insurance cards, right? The insurance card could be Highmark, it could be a Medicare plan, it could be a state-funded plan, it could be a plan that's purchased on the exchange, right? So we want to make that clear on the cards for the physicians, so that they know if whether it's a Medicare plan, so it's or a self-funded plan, so that when they're billing, they have a better idea of how they should be reimbursed. And that came from visiting with folks from the medical society, trying to determine some things that we could do to help not only ACOs but primary care physicians. And it seems like our hospital systems are buying up these family care physicians. They're buying up the visiting nurses, the physical therapists,
private practices.
Yeah, so private practice are suffering, right? So one of the things that we did with the General Assembly was pass a bill that is the primary care bill, so that physicians who are in the business of primary care are reimbursed at a higher rate. It was modeled off of a Rhode Island initiative, so that the ultimate goal was to increase reimbursement for primary care at a rate of about 12%. And we are in the second or third year of that now. We'll be entering the third year, and it's been successful, but not to the level that we would like. And you were absolutely correct when you had mentioned the challenges with Medicare and Medicaid and self-funded plans, because we don't regulate them. However, I serve on the SEBC, that's the State Employee Benefits Committee, we work with SBO, which is the State Benefits Office, and we are working with them to try to get them to come on board with this bill, meaning that they too would be reimbursing physicians at a higher rate. It would ultimately, in the beginning, probably cost a little bit more, but we know early intervention, right? And we know that the first steps are either their primary care docs or an organization like yours, where you diagnose someone early, right?
Mm-hmm.
You catch it before it becomes a situation where they have to be hospitalized with a cardiac issue or cancer or things like that. So you spend money early to save it in the long run. So it's a challenge to get any bill passed when it has a fiscal note attached to it, right? So we were able to absorb some of the costs of this. We call it the Office of Value-Based Healthcare Delivery, and our initiatives to try to hold the costs down while increasing reimbursement for physicians. So how do you do that? We do that by having some of the larger hospitals take a haircut, right? So that they don't see these significant increases that they've seen year after year after year, so that we can put more money into primary care with the challenge of not raising premiums. And I will tell you that on the exchange this year, premiums did go up, but it was 2 to 3% in some cases, as high for the small group as around just under 5%. So it's working. In other words, the healthcare on the commercial healthcare on the exchange has stabilized. When I first started, we were seeing rate increases of 20, 30, 35%. And it was unsustainable.
It's about 40 to 47% actually from our own plans that we have from United Medical.
Say that again?
It's about 40 to 47% increase we have since 2016. This is for United Medical's health insurance and also two of my other practices. So we pay about 40 to 47% more depending on the group size right now since 2016. But I know that's not related to your office because it is, your office has oversight on that, but the pressure that we get from the insurance companies, from the hospitals, is probably pushing that. But I think you have you actually got to a point of the primary care bill, which was one of the really best bill for the private practices for primary care.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons that what I was asking you earlier, increasing the jurisdiction, at least for these self-funded plans. Because what happens when you have the primary care bill, when you look at it, you actually, the bill itself is only for fully insured plans. So we actually, we work with Brian Townsend. He's been on this show at least 4
and
times.
David Benz, he was the representative.
So, David Benz, and then there's others, but Brian actually came to us, and then he was part of this show for 3-4 times. And then one of the things we realized during these conversations is when we were expecting the Medicare allowable from other insurances, we realized that it was not the case because the bill didn't include the self-funded plans. And that wasn't the bill's fault. That's because of the jurisdiction issue that it's not overseeing those. So that's why I'm asking, can we actually fix that? And who do we need to work with to make sure that these self-funded plans are not acting independently, so that they should be treated like a fully insured plans, just like any others? So that's what's kind of like where I was trying to go.
No, I understand. We would have to change the state law. And that would be something that Senator Townsend could perhaps look into. I know Representative Dave Benson was a big supporter. He has retired from the General Assembly, but Brian Townsend and I in my office, we have regular contact with him and other folks that are all part of the primary care collaborative. But no commissioner in any of the 50 states and the 6 territories has jurisdiction over these ERISA plans or these plans like this state plan. And that's codified in state law. So if we were to try to, and I did watch, some of the other interviews that you've done, you can't just change a regulation. The regulation essentially explains the law. So, it would require a change in the code, and then we would change our regulations to essentially explain the code to the industry.
Lieutenant governor position is an extremely important position. The presiding officer for the Senate, succession to the governor if something happens to the governor, chairing the board of pardons and advocate and public advocacy and public engagements, and there are so many other important roles that you have. But it's also very involved in a way that, and I'm not making any comparison in any way, but when you are in that position, pretty much it's almost like running a corporation company. Like you are in charge. So if something happens, first call goes to either to you or to the governor, depending on who's answering for first, I guess. So, and it's you're in charge of everything from economy to the healthcare to the social issues. And in my opinion, someone who is in the seat that you are in as a representative today, and your third term, completion of your third term, so it's an important experience for us to see someone like you running for this position. Now, the first you have to overcome the primary elections, and there is another nice candidate running for Kyle Evans. And she was with us a couple of weeks ago, and we are independent from every point and trying to. And I haven't met her before, and I haven't met you before, so you guys are both same distance to me until we get to know you guys, right? But again, competing with your own party, another Democrat, it brings a lot of responsibilities as well. So how do you plan to overcome and still win this election?
Very good question. Well, you are correct. She is a very nice person. We're actually friends, and we're going to be friends when the election comes to an end on September 10th, 2024. We'll still be friends September 11th, 2024. I don't believe in negative campaigning, and there are actually 4 people in this race right now, 4 Democrats. What we do, and this is how I've always campaigned, is I stay on the issues. We may disagree on the issues, but we don't have to be disagreeable. We don't have to be disrespectful. And I believe that we can set the tone for how elections should be run with this lieutenant governor's race.
Mm-hmm. So starting with the day one you are elected and now you are in charge in the office, normally I have my questions in different order, but I do want to bring up, just because what happened in Maine, and then this is, one of those habits that we have. So something bad happens, we talk about it for a couple of days and then we forget. So 2 nights ago when I heard the news, and unfortunately the society that we live in, and for someone who was born and raised in Turkey, for 24 years. I was 24 when I got here, never left since then. I'm a Delawarean by choice. And the thing was, as soon as I see the news, unfortunately, and I'm just being honest with you, my first reaction was, I'm hoping that it's not some Middle Eastern name. Just because what's also happening with Israel and the other stuff. And I was, how these things are, the social stigma of every kind of sensitive topic makes people more maybe self-conscious with those things. And then I kind of got upset with myself. I'm like, there are people who lost their lives and people who are injured. And what I'm thinking first thing is, oh, I hope it's not some Middle Eastern guy. Now, Turkey, depending on the day that people have, so we can be on the Europe side or we can be on the Middle East side. So depending on how it is. So that I kind of like really, I don't like the way that I thought. But then I overcome that issue. Now, this problem that we had brings the gun control problem right away, right? So that discussion of gun control, is it related to gun control? If we had better gun control, would this not happen? So in fact, like when we go through, our topics, and not every time we have guests in this show, so then I have to cover this with my another fellow in our business development, Sean. So we prepare and then see, we just discuss those topics between each other. So, but then all of a sudden gun control came up again, because last time we discussed this was maybe the last time when this similar thing happened.
Right.
So what do you think is the solution for these types of issues that we have, and what's the best approach would be for gun control?
That's an outstanding question. Well, first, I'd like to address the first part of what you mentioned, that you were praying that the person wasn't of Middle Eastern descent. It is natural to feel that way when a situation or circumstance arises and you are a person of color or someone who's different. You pray that the individual does not look like you. And that's just how we think, because we know that when one person does something who looks like us, then all of us have done it. And that's just being honest and realistic and having these open, honest conversations so people understand how we feel, that this is how we have to process. Mm-hmm. So upon finding out that he wasn't a Black mm-hmm. person or a person of Middle Eastern descent or a person of color, did it make us feel any better? No, because lives were lost. At the end of the day, what needs to happen is legislators have to make the tough decisions about red flag laws. And Maine does not have any red flag laws. We do have them in Delaware. We have red flag laws. We've done a lot around gun control. And one of the biggest things that we've done is ensure that people who are mentally ill cannot gain access to firearms. We don't want to take away anyone's right to firearms. We know that the Second Amendment exists for a reason. We know that people like to hunt. And in Maine, people do like to hunt. That's part of the culture. And in many other states, even in Delaware. However, we want there to be responsible gun ownership. And that does not say that we don't want you owning a gun, a responsible gun owner. A responsible gun owner is not going to go to a bowling alley and shoot the bowling alley up and hurt people and kill people, and then leave there and go to a restaurant where people are enjoying a night out and then they don't come home. That should never be, yet it happens too often. And that has actually hit home. There was a person who was a victim of a mass shooting in Ohio, and she's my cousin's goddaughter. So she spent Christmases with us, and she will never spend another Christmas with us because someone lost their mind in Dayton, Ohio, and decided to just shoot the block while she and one of her best friends were dining and celebrating their promotions. This cannot continue to happen, yet it does. In Georgia, another state that doesn't have red flag laws, that just voted that veterans, regardless of if they have mental illness, can gain access to firearms. I wholeheartedly support veterans. My father is a veteran. My uncles are veterans. I have family members who are veterans. But if you are mentally ill, regardless of your status, you should not have access to a firearm, because at some point you are going to do something that should not happen and cost others their lives. Now look at the manpower being used to try to find this individual who killed dozens of people. It's a sad dynamic for a country. Our children should be able to go to school and go to school in peace and not be concerned with someone having to come into their school and hurting them or their teachers. And teachers are heroes. Let's talk about that too. Look at how many teachers have stepped in the line of fire to protect our babies. But you have to have legislators who have the courage to stand strong in the midst of adversity. And then we also, I don't want to belabor this, but what does your faith look like? Our country was founded on Judeo-Christian principles, and we've gotten so far away from our foundation. And we have to get back to praying. My mother was an educator, and we talk about it all the time. And she said, when they took prayer out of school, that's when the devil was allowed to come and roam the classrooms and roam the hallways. And now look at what is happening in our country. So we have to get back to a place where we cover our children, we protect them through prayer. Or what? And this is not about one religion being better than the other. This is however you pray. Let's make sure that we're taking care of our communities.
You know, I mentioned gun violence is one of the top issues that I hear about, probably the top issue, the number one issue that I hear from folks up and down the state is the cost of living, that the American dream is too often inaccessible and unaffordable. And, you know, whether it's the cost of housing, whether it's medical bills that are coming in, whether it's the fact that childcare for many families costs more than a mortgage itself. And of course, just the price of daily needs like groceries and gas. It's breaking the bank for far too many families up and down our state. And we have to recognize that as elected officials, we have a responsibility to bring down the costs facing families. That's one of the reasons I will say why I prioritize paid leave, because getting a cancer diagnosis shouldn't result in losing your financial security because you have to give up your income. You know, people are living in many cases paycheck to paycheck. And when you take time off work to get chemotherapy and radiation, you don't have the savings necessary to continue to pay your rent or your mortgage or put food on the table. And so paid family medical leave, for instance, is one of the prime examples of the kinds of policies we can pass to ensure that people have the breathing room necessary to get through inevitable life challenges and maintain their financial security. But there's so much more we can do. When it comes to housing, federal government should be putting more investments in affordable housing, both affordable housing in the context of subsidized housing, but also affordable housing for the great middle who don't get aid and support in purchasing a home, but who struggle to afford one nevertheless. There's no question that we have a housing shortage in this country. And so we need to be creative about how we make sure that we protect our open space and environment while ensuring that there is the kind of housing stock available to meet the demand, which helps to bring down the cost. That means more density in certain places. It means looking at our commercial areas and retrofitting them is reclassifying them as multi-use so that we can have more living facilities and residential facilities in those places. I think when it comes to interest rates, I am cautiously optimistic that with sustained reduction in inflation, we will see interest rates decrease. I think the Fed and others are looking for sustained decrease in interest rates before they bring down inflation, before they bring down interest rates. But I'm cautiously optimistic that because of the progress that our economy has made already in the last year with things like the Inflation Reduction Act passed by President Biden and the decreasing inflation rate, that if that sustains, we'll see a decrease in the interest rates that we're seeing for mortgages. But I want to go beyond that, because it's not just housing. Childcare is one of the top issues I hear about from people, because right now, as I mentioned, for some folks, childcare costs more than a mortgage. And in some cases, it makes more financial sense for a parent to leave their job entirely, to stay home with their child, than to stay in their job and pay for childcare. That is ridiculous. Everyone loses out when people are forced, not by their own choosing, when they are forced out of the workforce because the financial incentives push them to do so. And so we have to pursue aggressively at the federal level investments in early childhood education to create affordable childcare and universal pre-K across our country, including in Delaware. And without federal investment, Delaware will struggle to meet that need and to achieve that goal. And so it's one of the reasons why it's a priority for me in my campaign and my service in Congress to bring in investments for early childhood education, because one of those cost of living issues I hear about is the rising cost of childcare. And the list goes on, but government has a role. We can responsibly spend in ways that help to maintain the support that families need, bring down costs that they're facing while not contributing to inflation. Build Back Better would have done that. And I think in 2025, those pieces that fell out, like universal pre-K, paid leave at the federal level, investments in home care and healthcare and housing, that we should pick those up and pass those and send them to a President Biden in his second term.
Well, I want to stay optimistic with everything that's happening globally. I am it's going to be a challenging time. So, and I want people to also kind of watch what they do and, maybe stay away from unnecessary spendings, and then see if they can actually do a better budgeting, because some of those things are not going to come from the government. They're going to come from us, from the individuals and from the families. And if you don't have a good understanding from the individual standpoint, then we won't really have a good way to process how everything is coming to our way. And I'm hoping that maybe in the next 3 to 5 years, we would be in a better position. Now, let's talk about healthcare a little bit. Well, we are a healthcare provider, United Medical, ACO, United Medical. Now, United Medical ACO, from the Medicare Accountable Care Organization standpoint, MSSPs, we were for program year 2022, we were #1 in the state of Delaware, and for the nationwide, we were ranked 17 based on this savings ratio for the federal government. Well, Medicare expenditures are coming from our federal government, which is coming from our taxes. So I feel like we are doing our part to help the government to save money. Yet we still have a lot of challenges as a private organization, for a for-profit organization as well. So you and I, we talk about some of these issues in the past. We have to compete. We are competing with giant health systems, and we still have to do the same job. Or in some cases, we have to do it better, because they can make things easier for themselves, because they get different sources, different financials, different money from different places. So, and healthcare is still one of the biggest item in terms of the state, in terms of the national level. The expense from the expenditure standpoint, almost 1/3 of the state budget, and I think it's pretty proportionate with the federal level. So this is a huge expense, and it requires a lot of changes. Yet we have also resource issues, such as physician shortage,
Yes.
and trying to find new physicians, providers, opening new offices. Would like to hear your take on healthcare and what your plans are.
Sure. So I believe that in our lifetime, we can achieve universal coverage here in the United States. There's not one way to achieve universal coverage. Other countries have hybrid systems. Other countries have obviously single payer in certain instances. There are multiple ways of achieving universal coverage. And we took a huge step forward as a country with the passage of the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. And I'm proud that President Biden continues to build on that progress, and that we've expanded, for instance, the ability of Medicare to negotiate for prescription drugs, a component of bringing down the cost of healthcare. But there's obviously more work that we need to do. I think we should continue to pursue strategies like lowering the age of eligibility for Medicare to cover more people. I think there are a whole host of reasonable next steps that'll help to push us closer to that goal of universal coverage and that are politically realistic. And I will be spending my time in Congress championing that goal of universal coverage, and I will pursue every common sense measure that brings us closer to that goal. But like you said, you can't begin and end the conversation around healthcare with just coverage. There's so many more pieces to the pie. There's so many more elements of the equation to bring down costs and ensure true access. Because you can have coverage, but if you have to drive 2 hours to get to the provider that you need, that's not a particularly practical option. And you shouldn't have to take that amount of time off to get even, in many cases, routine care. And so one of the top priorities I've had at the state level, and I'll continue to have this priority at the federal level, is to make Delaware a better destination for providers to live and work in. So for instance, we've passed reforms to increase reimbursement rates in primary care because we know that we under reimburse in primary care here in Delaware. Everywhere under reimburses, we particularly under reimburse in primary care, which we know when we have more primary care providers in this state and therefore make primary care more practical and accessible for people, that not only do we see reduced healthcare costs, we see improved health outcomes. I've worked a lot with my Republican colleagues on oral health care and reforming some of our licensure policies to open up pathways to practice here in Delaware. We've done loan repayment for healthcare providers in this state. And last year, we reformed the policies around physician burnout that so often meant that if you were a physician that pursued mental health care for yourself, that you put your license at risk. And we shouldn't be discouraging our caregivers to get the care that they, like everyone, need to live and to thrive. And so we reform those policies to maintain patient safety and appropriate regulation while also opening up pathways for that kind of healthcare. One of the things I'd like to see us do, and I'd like to see a strong state and federal delegation partnership, is to fund and open up a medical school in Delaware to create that pipeline of providers in this state that I think would be a huge boon for Delaware's healthcare systems. And so I think there's a whole lot of exciting opportunities before us to expand access to care. We've made progress, but without federal action, we'll leave too many policies on the table.